Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another edition of In the Pit with Lobo Tigre. My victim of the day is my old friend, Doug Casey, a man who needs no introduction. And I have to say this is the perfect conversation, I think, for right now, because the talking heads on financial media are starting to use the term the Greater Depression, usually to dismiss it immediately as a possibility that could never happen. But Doug is the man who coined the phrase, as far as I know, the first to use it many years ago. Doug, you predicted this for a long time, for a long, long time. So tell us, why do you think the Greater Depression is finally upon us?
Well, it was inevitable in the way that cause always has effect. The strange thing is that it's being blamed on this coronavirus hysteria, which is really nothing more than the pin that broke the bubble. We could have had any kind of a pin, but this is a very convenient pin. The coronavirus itself, we have to comment briefly on that, since about 90% of the news today is about coronavirus. My view from very early on is that the coronavirus is just another virus, another flu that's gone through. We've had bird flu and swine flu and hantavirus and MERS and SARS, and everybody should know, if they don't, that the normal seasonal flu generally kills 30 to 60,000 Americans every year, which is all this will do. So this impresses me as a mess and completely artificial hysteria, and it's unimportant from that point of view. What is important is the hysteria that's been generated among the members of the public, and B, the government's reaction to all of this, which is going to be, the consequences are going to be much more serious and much longer lasting than anything else. So this is going to turn out to be like 911 on steroids before it's over. It's a disaster. So that's my view on it in a nutshell.
Okay. Well, I could push back about the COVID thing. I don't want to get sidetracked on the medical issue. Generally, I tend to agree with the overall view, but the overflowing hospitals in Italy, that I don't think that's fake news. And so if you have this COVID on top of the existing flu season and you exceed your capacity, there's an issue there. Now, does that justify shutting down the whole world? You know, that's another conversation. But let's not go there. Let's agree that the pin has pricked the bubble.
The answer is no. And of course, I don't believe anything I hear, because everything about this this bubble, the COVID bubble, it's all conflicting. You don't know really what to believe, who's lying, and for what reason.
Yeah, I'll give you that.
The fact of the matter is that apparently the fact of the matter is that 90% of these dead Italians are old people that had some other disease. So I don't know what's happening.
Yeah. Okay. Well, they're still dead, and if you still overflow your hospital, that's still a problem, isn't it?
Gets out of here alive, Lobo. So.
All right. Yeah, but politicians have to pander to the voters. You know, they could have voted one more time before they shuffled off their mortal coil. But okay. But let's do.
I would like to assist them in that. I think that there are thousands, not just hundreds, but there are thousands of politicians throughout the world at this point, since this is a worldwide hysteria, that should be crucified and or drawn and quartered. There are all kinds of terrible things I could think to make an example out of them, but that's just a dream in my head.
It's a fond wish. I understand, but let's focus on the depression question, and in classic Doug Casey style, as you have set most excellent example. Let's start with a definition. You know, I asked you if you think this is it, and you gave me kind of the why, the pin pricking the bubble, but we didn't establish a definition. And your favorite definition is a period of time in which people's standard of living declines. But that's not really the standard definition.
No, most people's standard of living declines significantly. But that's just one of three definitions that I use.
Okay, hit me.
Now, that kind of a depression, if you use that definition of a depression, it can apply to something that would happen because of a war or a fire or a flood, earthquake, Those things can all cause a depression if you use that definition. Perhaps more precise definitions, however, are a depression is a period when the business cycle climaxes, and I think we're seeing that as well. It's also, a third definition I like to use, is it's a period of time when distortions and misallocations of capital in the marketplace are liquidated. And we're going to see that too. So yeah, this is it. And I know, as intellectually honest as you are, Lobo, you're going to bring up the fact that when we were doing interviews years past, I was always a gloom and doomer, saying that yes, with 2008, we entered the leading edge of a gigantic hurricane, and we went through that leading edge in 8 and 9 and 10, and I'm just surprised that the eye of the storm is as large as it is. But we're definitely, at this point, famous last words, this time I'll be right. We're entering the trailing edge of the hurricane, and this is going to be much, much worse and much longer lasting and much different than 2008 and 9 and 10.
Okay, I'll ask you about why you think that, but let's get back to the definition real quick, because the standard definition that most people adhere to is a variant of a period of time in which, an enduring period of time lasting 2 or 3 years, in which GDP contracts significantly on the order of 10%. Like, these are specific numbers that economic types use. And so, you know, it gives people an out to say that, well, this isn't really a depression. GDP hasn't contracted that long for 3 years. It was only that down for 1 year or something. So why is your definition better? And by the way, if it's not as protracted as that definition says, or actually let me rephrase that. Would you expect that technical definition to be met within the case of what you're saying? And if not, why is your definition better?
Well, to start with, I don't put a huge amount of credibility in government figures. Right now, I'm speaking to you from Uruguay, which isn't nearly as bad as Argentina. It's more backward than Argentina, but it's not nearly as bad as Argentina in fudging the numbers. Trusting the U.S. government's numbers on things like GDP is just a little bit better than trusting the Argentine government with their numbers on these things. They're created out of. You shouldn't pay attention to them, and even if they were honest, they'd still be wrong, because if the government has a giant program having people dig holes during the day and pays them, and fills them in at night and pays them, well, that's going to add that much more to the GDP. So you really can't trust any of these numbers. Look, I've always, as an amateur classicist, for many years, most of the reading that I've done is not financial reading. That's kind of trivial and of passing interest and mostly opinion. I mostly read ancient history and science. Those are the two things that I generally read. And my opinion is that the U.S. as a civilization, the world, the West as a whole, led by the U.S., really peaked just before World War I. And in many ways, as a culture, as a civilization, we've been declining for the last 100 years. As unbelievable as that sounds, since the average standard of living has been going up, and we've become more dominant, and all this type of thing. It depends on your time frame of looking at these things. So I thought you were going to say the 1950s. I remember you saying before that those Chevys with their big long fins, or the Caddies with the big long fins, were a symbol of the peak of American power and cultural dominance. Yes, that is true from another point of view. There's lots of everything doesn't peak at the same time.
Okay.
And I say that Western civilization actually did peak just before World War I, which took it down a peg. And then World War II took it down further. And so that's from one point of view. And you're right. I think from a standard of living point of view, relative to the rest of the world, I'd say that the late 1950s, early 60s was the peak for the U.S. And we've been going down subtly since then. Okay. You know? And you could say yes, and there was another major ratchet down after the devaluation of the dollar in 1971.
Yep.
So there's lots of things, lots of ways we can look at it now. And of course, now as we speak, the world is quite justifiably thinking about China becoming the largest economic force on Earth. And the average income of a whole bunch of countries is greater than that of the average income of Americans. I think we're number 10 or something like that, and headed lower for lots of reasons we can talk about.
All right. Well, all right. So that's part of the depression. So again, let's put a period in underscore under the definition thing. Your argument is that the technical definition with GDP and so on, since you can't trust the numbers, that definition is useless. Therefore, you have these other definitions like the declining standard of living over a period of time. And that's what you see happening now. That started. I mean, you could argue, though, by your definition, that it really did start in 2008. And the gigantic eye of the storm and the financial bubble that's resulted hasn't really made the life of the average Joe any better. I mean, the record low unemployment numbers that we've seen don't include all the discouraged workers, all the gig workers, the part-time workers. The quality of these jobs arguably is much lower since 2008. So it might actually be that you were right in 2008. We did start the Greater Depression then. It just hasn't gotten really going until now.
Well, you know what Deng Xiaoping answered when somebody asked him, "What do you think the consequences of the French Revolution are?" You know what he said?
No, I don't remember that one.
He said, "It's too early to tell." Actually, quite correct.
All right.
I mean, we get distracted by, involuntarily, even by what we hear on the news or something like that. So we won't really know for another 20 or 50 or 100 or 200 years.
That reminds me of something that a high-placed minister, I probably can't name him anyway, so I won't, but a high-placed minister I met on one of my trips to China looking at a mining company. And this was pretty early on when they had just opened up to Western companies to come in and exploit natural resources in China. And I asked this minister guy, how is it okay in communist China to allow these Western capitalists to come in and exploit the resources of China for a profit? And he said, "Oh, it's no problem. We have market communism now." And then I said, "Oh, well, that's great. But, what about the institutions that capitalism requires? The transparency, the rule of law, all these things that make for stable markets, and how, the guts of capitalism. What about all that?" And he says to me, "Oh, it's no problem. In China, we have 50-year communism, but we have 5,000-year capitalism." And he was right. He was right. They understand business.
That's right. Mao is just another, and communism in China is just another blip on the 5,000-year screen of Chinese history. So who knows what's
well, okay. So going back to
coming next, but
go ahead.
But listen. My guess is that China is probably going to break up into at least 5 or 6 different countries. They might go back to a period of warlords again. I mean, anything's possible at this point, because among other things, this experiment that they're making with the social credit system, really, really disturbing from the point of view of individual liberty. And I have no doubt that we're going to have some variety of that here in the West as well.
Well, again, I don't want to get too distracted on the side, but that is a really interesting conversation, because the things that have been done in response to the COVID outbreak that seem most effective are all horrifying from a civil liberties point of view. Like what South Korea did to flatten the curve, was Big Brother. It was Orwellian, what was done there. So, but again, I don't want to get distracted on that. I do want to come back to something about 2008. Let's give it to you that you were right, that it started, by your definition, in 2008. But one thing that we said, and I drank the Kool-Aid then too, so I'm not beating up just on you, but we thought this was going to be massively inflationary. The government tripled the money supply almost overnight back then. The Fed did something on its balance sheet, which now looks modest, but back then it was unprecedented, off the charts. Look what the Fed did to its balance sheet. This is going to be massively inflationary, and yet, apart from certain asset classes, we really didn't see that much inflation. So, what makes you? Do you think it will be different this time? Will there be more inflation? And if so, why? And if not, why not? Right now, the immediate consequence looks pretty deflationary.
Yes. Well, as you well recall, because we've been having these conversations for many years, I've always said, and actually this has been an argument that's gone on since the 60s, is when the collapse comes, will it be deflationary or inflationary? And I've always tried to point out both possibilities. The way I see it now is that it might be deflationary to start with. We've been seeing that in the commodities market, certainly for some time.
Except for gold.
And when the stock market crashes, for instance, that wipes out really that much purchasing media that people thought they had, but it's not there anymore. When a bond defaults, what happened to the $1 billion? It's gone. We're actually seeing deflation now, but that's the last thing that the powers that be want to see. So they're printing up all this money. So, we're going to go into runaway inflation. I don't think there's much doubt of it. And that's why it's going to be such a super catastrophe, not just a mini catastrophe like the last depression, which was caused and prolonged by the government, but a real catastrophe because all the world's central banks hold the dollar as their main asset. And when the Fed destroys the dollar, it's going to have an effect on all these other currencies too. Not to say that their own central banks aren't printing up yuan and euros and yen and whatever by the truckload. So it's going to wind up that way. That's why I'm really bullish on gold. Gold is the only thing, and I watch all the commodities, incidentally. Hogs and soybeans and cocoa and God knows what. And there's going to be some real opportunities. But gold is the only thing that I really think is going to work for lots of reasons, for sure.
All right. Would you include silver in that?
I want to include silver in it because silver's always been at least a secondary money. But the problem with silver is that, and actually it's a double-edged sword. It is money. There's no question about it.
It is the word for money in so many languages.
Yeah, it's true. And of course, if you really want to stretch it, you could include copper, because copper's been used as money since Roman times. So that's what the sestertius was. So I suppose. But it really comes down to gold. Look, silver is a great speculative medium. Silver is a great speculative medium for many reasons we can talk about. There aren't huge overhanging supplies of it like there are with gold. All the gold that's ever been mined, probably about 6 billion ounces, nobody knows, but that's a good guess, is still above ground. It's hoarded. It's not true of silver.
Right, silver's consumed.
It's consumed. So you can dig it out of various places. God knows, melt down family silverware. Yeah, you can do that. But it's not like gold that way. And the ratio, not that it really makes any difference, between gold and silver right now is about 110 to 1, the highest in history. And a lot of people, put way too much credence in these ratios.
Yeah, no, I agree about the gold-silver ratio, at the very least not having predictive power. It tells you something, but it doesn't tell you which, how the gap will close.
Right.
But it does. The reason why I asked, though, is that silver is also an industrial metal, and if you've got China is shut down and they're not making photovoltaic cells, that's a huge actual offtake not being taken off from the market. So the near-term hit to silver based on its industrial use, makes sense to me.
Yeah, so I'm interested at some point in speculating in silver, but when it comes to preserving wealth, which is really the most important thing over the next decade, because we're really going to go through the meat grinder, that's what gold is all about.
Okay, fair enough. Let me come back to the deflation inflation thing again. I want to ask again, what is different this time? Because you and I predicted it too back before I got out of the prediction business. I thought that we were going to see very high inflation, maybe after a bit of disinflation initially, crash of 2008, of course, panic, people don't spend, fine. But they're printing all that money. I thought that, it might take a year or two for all that new money to percolate through the economy and start pushing, the costs of not just financial assets, but, consumer goods up. And that really didn't happen. All that inflation went into Wall Street and actually gold eventually. But so what's different this time?
Well, one thing that happened starting in 2008 is the rich really did get a lot richer. I mean, it's only been since 2008 that we've seen $100 million condominiums and this type of thing, because the rich always get the fire hose of money that flows out of Washington and New York first before it trickles down to the little people in the hinterland. So that was one thing that happened. Now, what's going to happen this time if they're printing up several times? By the time it's over, they might wind up printing up 10 times more than they did in this last misadventure. Will it all go into the financial? I don't think they can reinflate a stock market bubble at this point. Earnings of these big corporations are going to collapse. Are they going to bail them all out? I don't think so.
Why not? I mean, they're pretty much, isn't that what they've said? I mean, the Fed's buying junk bonds. I mean, isn't that as clear an indication as any of we've got everybody's back?
They're going to bail out. They're going to try to bail out everything. These people are actually insane. I mean, what I said earlier about their being drawn and quartered and crucified and hung, I was serious about that. Before this is over, I think the average person is going to feel that way. At least I hope so. But maybe not, because the more I think about it, the more it seems to me that people like a strong leader. We're seeing strong leaders arise all over the world now.
But not just that, but bread and circuses. The checks aren't just going to Wall Street now; they're going to Main Street too, in a much larger and more noticeable way. So bread and circuses.
Everybody thinks it's the answer and all that. So what we're looking at here, from every point of view, is the biggest and most stupid mass hysteria since the witch trials of the late 17th century. I mean, this is actually something of world historic importance that we're witnessing now on our widescreens while we're sipping lattes. I mean, it's quite amazing.
Okay, but I got to hold your feet to the fire one more time on this, because how do we know that they won't be able to paper this all over? There's a lot of damn paper, Doug. You're just, as you're saying, it's a lot of paper. And I remember looking you in the eye in 2008 and saying, is there any way the powers that could be can fix this? I mean, because at the time, the world was going to hell in a handbasket, and it looked like it was it. The balloon was going up. And you said, I just don't see it. And I believed you. So now you're saying, they can't paper it over. So tell me.
That's exactly right. Because as you know, because you would have answered the same thing. It's the only way they can fix it is by totally withdrawing the government from the economy and abolishing the Federal Reserve and selling off all the federal government's assets and retrieving all the troops from around the world. That would have fixed it, okay? But it would have been a huge, it would have undone all these distortions so quickly.
It was politically impossible.
Yeah, I mean, that would have fixed it. And it would have been good if they'd done it then. It would have been better if they'd done it during the crisis of the early 1980s. It would have been better yet if they'd done it during the 1960s. So every time it becomes more and more impossible to fix it. You can fix it, but it's practically impossible to fix it. Impossible from a practical point of view. So we have to wait until it all collapses. The problem is after it all collapses, things usually get worse. That's the problem.
Yeah.
In fact, they almost always get worse.
The man on the white horse comes in.
Exactly. I mean, it's the same thing. France, after Louis says, "Oh God, glad he's gone." Well, now they get Robespierre, and then they get Napoleon. And the same thing with Russia. Glad Nicholas II's gone. Oh, here comes Lenin, and then Stalin. So, the U.S. is part of history. It's likely to happen.
All right, so we could say a lot about that. Let's turn this into the direction of what can we say constructive to people? And not hypothetically here. I don't want a model portfolio, Doug. What are you doing with your own money right now? I mean, you're probably doing many of the things you've always done, but are you doing anything specific to this situation right now with your own money that you want to share with the audience out there?
Yeah, specific to this situation right now. Okay. I'm watching the commodities futures markets because there are some things that are getting really cheap. And if you're daring, it's going to be possible to make a super double killing going long commodities at some point because there's no commodity that's traded right now, to my knowledge. I think I'm quite correct, where the producers are making money. In fact, they're hemorrhaging money. Farmers are hemorrhaging money. Cattle producers and hog producers and soybean producers and cotton growers, everybody, coffee growers, they're all hemorrhaging money, okay? That's not going to go on forever. And that's going to have some interesting consequences down at the retail level sometime soon. Combine that, what I just said, with all this money that's being created. But I don't recommend that most people play with commodities. It's a really good way to get whipsawed and lose money for all kinds of reasons we can talk about. Okay, so forget that. I'll tell you what I'm doing, okay, is I'm buying gold stocks. Why? Because the average fund manager doesn't believe in gold. He's been taught to hate gold, that it's ridiculous. It's all the arguments why gold is really just like lead. That it's really just like lead, except that it glistens better. So none of these guys own gold stocks. The public doesn't own it own them either. And they're actually pretty cheap right now in historical terms. All the producers, all of them, are making money. I think the average all-in sustaining cost of a gold mine in the world, and of course, as you know, it varies greatly. Say it's $1,000 an ounce, but gold is like 1,700 or something like that. So, yeah, I think these fund managers are going to pile into gold stocks, and the public will too. And so we will get another bubble. But it's not going to be in ordinary common stocks. It's going to be in gold stocks, most of which are complete garbage and crap. But that doesn't make any difference. So the answer to your question is, yeah, that's what I'm doing.
Of course, that's music to my ears. But I wonder, are you actually buying like now, this week, last week? Did you buy, or? I mean, you've got these producers pulling their guidance because they're having COVID shutdowns, and whether they should or they shouldn't, they are, right? So you pull your guidance and you fail to meet your guidance or previous guidance, and maybe the shares get cheaper, or if Wall Street melts down again, we get another liquidity crunch, gold gets hit, the gold stocks get hit. Are you buying in advance of that? Do you care? You buy anyway, or what?
Well, believe it or not, I am maintaining cash in U.S. dollars. which are going to be the ultimate hot potato before this thing all ends. And yeah, I will buy more. I'm really a believer that this is one of those times where you can really go big and make a killing.
Sorry, the specific question, Doug, is, the specific question is, are you buying right now? Like when we get off the phone, is today is a day you might buy, or are you waiting to see if some of the more brown stuff hits the fan before you do that?
Well, first of all, when it comes to, I generally don't buy the big stocks. I mean, I actually own a lot of them, believe it or not, but I like the little stocks, the kind that you and I have always watched. And I generally don't buy them out of the market. I only buy them when they're financing, and I really like the financing terms. Sure. So am I going to buy anything when I get off the phone with you? The answer is no. I'm waiting for a really sweet deal, but I'll hear about a deal that's in a nice company that's well managed and all the 9 Ps, and it'll have a 5-year detachable warrant, and yeah, I'll buy that.
You're reminding me, I started and have not finished writing a report on private placements. I don't have one on my website right now. I just sort of assume most people know about private placements and what they're entailed, but I know I need to cover the basics, so I have a special report that I've started, and then all this COVID stuff started, and I got distracted. I forgot, I've got that thing half written. I need to finish that and explain that.
But time to do that. You're right.
Yeah, it is good timing, because with all the shenanigans going on and the shutdowns and things, there's going to be some juniors that have really interesting assets, stuff of merit in the ground, that they're going to need money. And under current market circumstances, it's probably going to be hard to raise it without offering a really juicy warrant.
I hope so. That's right. But the bubble in these stocks will come, and and at that point, that's when we want to sell out, and hopefully, I've always said when Slime magazine, if it still exists, and it may not, when they have a front cover of a golden bear tearing apart the New York Stock Exchange, that will be the bell ringing to sell your gold stocks and buy General Motors or GE, if they still exist. There'll be something worth buying.
Yeah, well, I think that day's coming. I personally, I don't think the bottom's in. I think we've gone into the sort of panic stage after the peak, but we haven't gone down deep into the fear and capitulation and despondency phases. I think that's ahead of us for mainstream equities, and therefore more fun to come.
Well, that's right, because I watched the promotions that go out for financial publications, and it appears that the average person still sees this as just, and it's being promoted to them, and they believe it. It's just a buying opportunity. It's like one of these other times when the market's gone down, and yeah, you would have been smart to buy, it turned out. So the bottom won't come until the average person actually doesn't even care the stock market exists. In fact, worse than that. Not only doesn't care it even exists, but wants to kill anybody that even wants to talk about the stock market with them. That's when the bottom will come. We're way away from that.
All right. Okay. Well, on that positive note, I think we can wrap it up. You are the man who coined the expression, the Greater Depression. So what better time to have such a conversation? Thank you very much for letting me poke some hard questions at you there.
Thanks, Lobo. And in a way, I'm kind of glad that a lot of these various hacks are stealing that expression from me without acknowledgement, because as the Depression gets much worse, I don't want to be associated with that, because they might blame it on me for having destroyed confidence, because the whole economy rests on nothing more substantial than confidence, which can blow away like a pile of feathers in a hurricane. So it's probably
it is literally a con job.
Yeah, exactly.
But you know what? It's the day of the internet, Doug. I think your name's all over that thing. When people start Googling, they might see the gurus of the day on Wall Street talking about the Greater Depression, but when they're going to see Doug Casey going back decades on that term.
Yeah, we'll see. It's all dust in the wind. I really don't care. But I do care that anybody that's listening goes to InternationalMan.com, where we have some really good stuff every single day. and including stuff that I do myself, believe it or not.
Back in the saddle, are you?
You got to fill those idle hours somehow. I mean, look, I'm in the middle of a 1,000-acre farm. Got absolutely everything that I need here: horses, cows, chickens, poodles. So nothing's really changed for me. I like to just keep busy, working on the next novel, which is almost completed.
Oh
Assassin.
yeah, I was going to ask, when do we get to see The Assassin?
It'll be out in July. We usually like to release them at Freedom Fest in July, but it's questionable whether Las Vegas will even be open. So I don't know if we'll do it then, but it's going to be quite good because Assassin talks and defends. I hate to say promote, can't do that. The concept of political assassination. And it's quite interesting with revisionist history. It's going to be quite a good book, Lobo. You're going to like it, I think.
All right, well, definitely looking forward to that, Doug. Thanks again. You, for all your skepticism, still stay healthy. You know, we don't need you mowed down by the common flu or anything else. We want you around for a long time, brother.
Oh, well, same to you, Lobo, but I doubt that hysteria is going to take out either one of us, unless it's rioting mobs in the next year.
Never say never. Okay, take care.
Okay, Lobo, thanks.